Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Saturday morning book club. We are reading the book, The Queering of the American Child by Logan Lansing. My really quick disclaimer is that this book is about sources. This book is about the resources rather than a ton of opinion. We try to leave opinion out and only stick to facts. My friend Christine Seafin Wolk is here, and she is a former mental health professor. So I really appreciate having her here because she can give some validity to the conversation. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to get started. We are doing chapters 3 and 4 today, but we probably won't make it all the way through 4 because it's kind of a long chapter. Warning, my friends, this book is heavy. This is stuff that we would never have expected to see in our schools, but yet it's exactly what's happening. Today in Provo, there is an event for supporting transgenderism and a counter protest in Provo, Utah. So we're definitely seeing this stuff, and you're going to see why. This is not this is not a homophobic book. I believe that Logan is actually a classical liberal.
Mhm.
This is not a book to smear people. It's just a book to explain and, quite frankly, to warn on the things that we are experiencing. So if you are watching and you wouldn't mind sharing it to any media that you have, our goal is just to get the word out. We aren't asking you to donate anything. We just want to get the word out and let as many people, as parents especially, know what's going on. So without further ado, I will share my screen. So queer theory, aka queer Marxism. In order to understand what's going on, you have to first start with the place that this is Marxism. And over the next hour, we'll try to explain why. So Marxism is predicated on the idea that man is creative and social in nature. In his economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1884, Marx argues that humans differentiate themselves from animals by making their life activity itself the object of their will and, of course, so for Marx, being creative means that humans are born in a world, in nature, and that we consciously decide what we want that world to look like. Then we go to work, transforming our nature by making the things we are inspired to make. But for Marx, we're not only transforming nature by making things like spears, baskets, and skyscrapers, we're also making ourselves. Marx argues that we make ourselves through our work in the world. We take our consciousness and make it an object. The thoughts in our head become material. We materialize them. So, what the thing about Marx is that he openly admits that he wants to be God himself. And I think that what I noticed in reading this chapter is how many times he's like, then man, then we, then you, then I. It's just a very kind of narcissistic viewpoint, is what it
Mhm.
seems like over and
Mhm.
over again.
Mhm.
Um, So, as an example that might help us understand Marx's proclamation that man sees himself in a world that he has created, for instance, but what I really see is myself. Through working on nature, I have materialized my consciousness, and by reflecting on my creation, I come to know myself as a creator in that reflection. So it really is turning people against God.
Mhm.
It's what it seems like it's intentionally turning people against God, and it's happening in school.
He talks about that. It comes up in the book a little bit later. I don't remember which chapter, but that in essence, the idea is that we're creating kind of all of these mini gods. So we all become our own little mini god in our particular community. So it's
Right.
almost so yeah. So it's almost like he he's perched himself up as the supreme god, and we're all of the smaller gods in a sense creating the same picture that he's telling us we need to create. So it's all about
Right.
creativity, but who's doing the creating and what is considered creativity? it's completely hypocritical.
And when you dig into who Marx was, he really wasn't that creative of a guy anyway. Like, I
Well,
mean,
there you go.
complaining about the fact that he had to wake up at 10 o'clock and go and
Yes.
oversee the workers.
Yes.
But the big issue, I think, is that this is what we're adopting in schools. And
Yes.
people don't necessarily know, they don't walk into school and hear Marxism 101 necessarily. I think our college kids do, but our teachers don't.
Mm-mm.
So creativity is part of my nature. And each time I make something in the world, I become more human and the world becomes more human because I'm putting more of myself, my thoughts turned material into the world. I'm transforming the world into me. The world and I are becoming one and the same through my conscious life activity. The distinction between myself and nature is evaporating. I'm humanizing the world. And each time I do it, I more fully realize who I am. When we look at what's happening with our children, when we look at the identity politics, it seems like more and more often we're moving into a place of narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
So can you
Well, if you're being called, I mean, if you're being told in some way that you're also a mini god in your own right, then of course the world, as we think of God as the supreme being that really has some role or some effect on how we move in the world, how we move as people, how things happen, meant to be, fate, destiny. We kind of think about those things. There is a God kind of structure involved in that. There's some kind of, you know, even if it's not labeled God, but a higher being, let's say, or even the universe, let's say. So there's this idea that we do have something that kind of moves us around in life that isn't 100% random, where free will is still included in a part of that. We still have, the opportunity to make choices for ourselves. But God, in essence, is actually not narcissistic, and that's the thing that makes him comparing himself to God. It's really kind of it's frightening. It's beyond inappropriate. It's disturbing. It's actually very disturbing. That's the ultimate in narcissism, because God, for what God is supposed to be, in whatever way you see a higher power, is the complete opposite. That God's role is to help us, you know, on this track to find our own fulfillment. It isn't that we are being told necessarily that this is what we have to do to create, and we've got to create this in order to be happy. God, I think, maybe mentions peace and
Yeah,
acceptance of others. And I think those are maybe that's Jesus also from the Bible. I don't know if we want to get so religious here,
right,
but acceptance of others, peace, and giving other people an opportunity to be leaders themselves without
right.
there being such a collectivism that we're following,
Which
kind
is
of a
perfect.
human. Yes, yes,
That's perfect because on page 52, it talks about tribalism and collectivism. So for
yes,
Marx, the history of my tribe's work preloads my consciousness. In this sense, I am my tribe. I don't think as an individual in a vacuum. There is no I think, only we think.
mhm,
So that is that Marx thought humans were naturally collectivists,
mhm.
that we're all collectivists, and that there is no room for the individual. Um, I do not want to get heavy into politics here, but I do want people to listen to what somebody who's running is talking about. Literally, there is no room for the individual. We as a collective are what makes change.
Yes.
So this
And
is
that's a
coming from the
classic
very
Marxist statement. Yes.
yes, and it's coming from the very, very top down. So so Marx called these activities praxis, which means man makes society. Praxis means that you have a belief, you have an ideology, and you practice that within your, specifically in this case, within your classroom.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean, um, so when people will say, oh, well, we're not teaching CRT in our schools. No, you're doing CRT in your schools.
Right.
You're doing culturally responsive teaching, which
Right.
is what chapter 4 really gets into. You're doing that in your schools, and that's praxis, which is how you have that, how teachers have that ability to say, oh, but we're not really doing that. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness, we're not going to teach your 5-year-old about Marx.
Mhm.
No, we're going to teach your child how they are to work as a collective, not
Well,
as a
yes,
individual.
and how to recognize their privilege and how to
Very much.
recognize the ways that they have perhaps oppressed others or harmed others and how they themselves have been harmed.
Exactly.
Um, which at 5 years old, I mean, that kind of a concept, the privilege wheel is what they use,
Right.
is beyond their s their level of sophistication cognitively has not developed to the point of being able to really comprehend what that means, but we're starting to teach them at that age that this dynamic does exist. So this is the seed planting, that this does exist. This
Right.
does mean, that eventually over time these things continue to get gain steam and gain more power the older I get. These things are just the seedlings that are planted in these 5-year-old brains, which is
Right.
quite frightening, obviously. There's no sense of like what makes you unique? Oh, I'm unique because at home this is, we're Indian and we cook, chicken tandoori, and that's
Right.
what makes me unique. Also, what makes me the same as somebody else, right? So there's that
Right.
component. I'm a human being and I have my own thoughts and my own belief systems. And at the same time, I can see the humanness in you and have compassion for what you feel and think, and also healthy disagreement, healthy conversation and debate without there being a power structure involved in that. That would probably be a better picture of celebrating diversity and also celebrating what makes us human and what connects us, because I think there's both things happening
Well,
at the same time.
and I do think that in a classroom that young, they would have that conversation, what makes us unique and what makes us the same. The issue becomes when they start saying, and which one of you has more privilege?
That is the issue right there. Bottom line. That's where you've taken this kind of, you know, beautiful way about thinking about humanity and you've turned it into a Marxist ideology, a
Right.
controlled cult in a
And
sense.
a
That's
cult is right. And intentional resentment. That is the big issue here.
yes,
Intentional resentment. If you are a person who lives in a state of constant resentment, you will be a depressed person.
yes.
Then you will need mental health, and we know where that leads.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes, it is
yeah,
that's very true. It becomes a chicken and egg that is just a spiral and you can't get out of it. Very hard to get out of it. I was just talking to my husband about this the other day. We were talking about medication that was prescribed for some reason, for to him and
yeah,
me. We both sat there and thought, gee, this medication has side effects. Now I need medication to treat the side effects. Now that medication also has side before you know it, you're taking 15 pills a day.
right,
So, that's
right. It's no, it's this. It is the same thing.
it's
It
an
is. It is.
it
My son and my daughter argue. So instead of being able to deal with that, because maybe I practice gentle parenting or something like that,
sure.
because of that, I go and I take them to a therapist, and the therapist digs deeper and finds the reasons. And then we have to remember that our therapists are being moved towards social change agents.
They are becoming social change agents. They are it's almost it has become almost a requirement, and people need to understand this if they're gonna go into therapy and put their kids into
Christine, can you
therapy.
tell people what you did? Real quick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was I am a licensed marriage and family counselor therapist here in California, but I also taught at the graduate level master's courses to other to other pre-licensees, people that were trying to complete their schooling in order to become licensed therapists. And so this is stuff that was already starting to seeps into the classroom. Academia is where it's the seat of where all of these kinds of philosophies actually develop, and it's the seat in which how we're supposed to think and what we're supposed to say and do, the privilege, the idea of white supremacy being inherent, all of that comes from the academic level. That's where all of this starts. That's why the school component, Carrie, that you talk about is so incredibly important because they are starting as young as 5 years old now. They're
Right.
not even waiting until
No, they're
college
actually starting
years,
at preschool. There's
preschool.
if you hear the term high quality preschool, you need to dig into that. because
Yes.
high quality is code word for
Yes.
woke
Yes.
now. It just is.
Yes.
So,
And
oh, go ahead.
you can't, even now in California, if you're a therapist, you need to complete continuing education units. Those continuing education courses are only approved if they contain, some form of critical theory, whether it's queer theory, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's gender affirming, practice, one anything has to include something along those lines. So even as therapists, as we leave school and we go off into practice, what we're doing in the classes we need to take to keep our licenses fresh are also inundated and have been taken over. If they do not include these components, they're not something that we'll ever get credit for. So my point is, therapists are being exposed to all of this. They're drinking the Kool-Aid, and they don't always feel they have a choice not to, because it's become mandated by the licensing boards.
Exactly. Let's look at this line. On 53, it says, um, all we will think and see is we are man creator. History will end because we will have realized our human nature as creative and collective beings. We will collectively become God. And in so
Hmm.
doing, we will remember that we are already God and have been all along. This is for our children. So we can think that as we buckle up our children and take them to church, that we're teaching them the right thing. But this is for our children. This is literally what the goal is here. So education is fully becoming public education, or rather state education, as I like to call it, because it definitely
Yes.
has an agenda. And that
Yes.
agenda is for the state to become God. So
Yes.
first, it breaks away a relationship with God. Now, here's the thing: this is not supposed to be a religious conversation, but they are decidedly anti-religious. And
Yes.
so, are Christians safe in schools? Are Judeo-Christians, or even Islam? And there's argument, which is a whole nother story. But who is safe in our schools when they're trying to change that we are God? That's literally what's happening as we
And
embrace
that's the ultimate narcissism. And this is why you see so many people that practice these philosophies being so entitled,
right.
because as a narcissist, that's the number one
Well,
quality that,
and to
that
force that
stands
on our
out.
families when we fundamentally believe that, and
Yes.
like that our beliefs are such that to believe we are God is kind of the ultimate sin. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so to force that on people, you need to ask again, is this a safe environment? So, oops, I went too far. Okay. So Marx is known as an economist, which is again kind of crazy when you when you know his history. But okay, so Marx's economic arguments cannot be reduced to capitalism isn't fair. I'm sorry, can't yeah. No, it is cannot be reduced to capitalism isn't fair because some people work for slave wages while others get rich. His economic arguments follow from this theology. Man is already a species being, a completely social and socialist, self creative entity. But estranged labor makes his true nature as such alien to him. That is, and we've been hearing this for a while. CREAM is the acronym. Capitalism ruins everything around me.
I've
So
never heard that. I love
yeah,
it.
there was a speaker who went to a school. I heard about this when I first moved to Utah, and they were wearing shirts that said that CREAM, and that's the goal. Capitalism ruins everything around me. That is, capitalism makes man forget who he really is.
Mm,
So Marx therefore thought that capitalism must go because the division of labor literally makes us animals pitted against one another. Anybody who has ever lived in a communist country, and I've spoken to many of those people, They understand that what turns you into animals is fighting for that last loaf of bread.
Yes.
So um it seems that it is always projection. Um
Yes.
so I'm just okay. This I thought was really good. Um in the Judeo-Christian tradition, Adam and Eve disobeyed God and they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. Their actions flung them into a world filled with sin, misery, and death. In the theology of Marxism, man ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in nature and learned that he could own private property. And upon that ownership, he divided his labor, which alienates him from himself as a creative and social species. I'm going to put my opinion here, but to me, Marx is the ultimate deadbeat. He's like in his 30s and he's writing letters to his mom saying, pay my rent or else.
Yes.
He's having
Yes.
an affair with his maid, maybe an affair. It might have been worse
Yes.
with his maid, and his wife has to live with the fact that he has another child who's never acknowledged in their own home. So
But that's and that's when we talk about the destruction of the nuclear family. His own nuclear family was not intact.
right.
His his
Yes.
own was broken, right? And that is one of the key components here that Marxism, communism, all of these kinds of cultural revolution moments that we're seeing,
Yes.
they they're rooted in destroying the nuclear family. Because
Absolutely.
without that, right, people can't form healthy attachments to others. They can't form healthy ideas about who I am in the context of the world I live in.
Their
And there's more than
purpose.
just me. What is my purpose?
Right. Right.
There's
And they give you a new purpose. I think it's important that people understand that man is born to worship. So if he's
yes,
not worshiping God, then apparently the offer is himself. But what people don't realize is that this is kind of the useful idiot thing, because ultimately they will worship the state. They will bow
yes,
to the state, or the state will have
yes.
the boot on their neck.
And we saw that with COVID. And
Right.
anybody who was, I mean, that was the most clearly, I mean, the clearest example, I think, in my own time on
Yeah.
this earth has been the draconian measures of COVID. That's exactly what happened. Is that the state we praised? I was watching a show the other day where they were talking about, they were making a joke, but they were talking about having a Fauci approved social gathering. And the fact that that has even though it was somewhat satirical, the fact that that's even a part of a
Yeah.
joke and a conversation, it just reinforces the idea that the state has become God and the
Yes.
state has become the boot, on your neck, obviously. So
Yes.
if people didn't see that, that's what kind of worries me about. I know we want to focus on children, but when children see their adults following that, children are also going to follow what
Yes.
their adult or the adults around them are doing. And I think
Yes.
that's the key message there that I got.
So, okay, in his fallen form, estranged from his species being, his humanity, he finds himself in a society stratified into classes, which leads to conflict, exploitation, I can't read that word because of,
Misery.
thank
Yeah.
you, misery and oppression. It's not that I can't read it, it's that my little sign is in front of it.
Oh,
To
okay.
re-enter and in fact to recreate the kingdom of or and to recreate the kingdom of God on earth. He must establish a communist society by abolishing private property, which is nothing more than materialized human estrangement. Communism is the goal here. And trust me, 3 years ago, if somebody would have used the word communism, I would have been like, okay, you're
You're
crazy.
nuts. You're
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 crazy.
you're
Yeah, like what are you? This
absolutely
is America.
conspiracy
This will
theorists.
never
It'll
happen.
never happen here. Conspiracy theorists. Yep.
So, but that's unfortunately who he was and what he talks about in his own books.
This is why it's so important for people that are part of the globalist agenda to buy up as much land and property as they possibly can.
Yeah.
That is their goal. The more they do that, the less we have an opportunity as kind of the common person to be able to afford purchasing our own homes and something that actually belongs to us. That's
Right.
why these institutions like BlackRock that are talked about frequently are, are evil. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, and it has to do with with their foresight to actually literally purchase up as much land as they possibly can. Bill
Well,
Gates
and
has,
again, if you just take it to the most simple area, right? If you own something, you tend to take
hmm
better care of it than,
yes,
like, rental properties often go to pot because they are,
yes,
they're nobody is personally invested in it. It's the same thing with a family. Your family
yes,
is your ownership, which is why when a lot of people say it takes a village, they're saying, you don't completely, your children are not completely yours.
yes.
So, and I used to fall for that. I used to think, oh,
Oh,
yeah,
I did
I'll take the
too.
child and do this, and you can take the child and do that, and whatever else. But when we're starting to watch that, they literally think that the children belong to the state and they can
Well, they
take
say that.
constantly. Yeah. So, by creating a socialist state through socialist practices, you create a socialist man through the invention of praxis. And so the circle runs back into itself again with the whole the chicken and the egg. We're creating a problem to solve
hmm
constantly.
hmm
And I don't know that we always love the way it's solved.
hmm
So
But I like that you said creating a problem because that's what so much of this is about. It is
yes.
creating a problem to be solved.
People
And
talk about mental health, right? They constantly talk about mental health. I recently found out that in our state alone that 193% increase of transgenderism in the last 4 years.
mm,
That is
mm,
created. That is
mm,
created when you walk into schools and you have quote unquote safe and affirming schools that are or safe and welcoming, which means affirming. Again,
yes,
they go into that in this. So the argument goes, those people who would work to perfect the socialist state, which in turn would perfect the socialist attitudes of future generations. This is what happens through carceral state power. It is no problem because power is always carceral. And the ends of liberation justify the means of totalitarianism
hmm
to get man to realize himself as a fully social self. So we need someone else to tell us how to be the right kind of individual.
yes.
Scary.
It reminds me of the Klaus Schwab. You will own nothing and you will be happy. You will own nothing. I forgot, it's a whole phrase, I think, and
Yes.
you will be happy. It's this idea that getting rid of freedom is what's going to actually bring more happiness to,
Right.
which is, it's funny because not to mention, there's a theme in some of the Marvel movies about this. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that movies, especially ones that are of that size, that kind of blockbuster that affects so many people that who are into them and who see them, whatever, there's a lot of hidden meaning in what we're experiencing as a culture and what we're experiencing right now in this oppressive state that we're talking about, because there is that sense, and that actually comes out in the film, in one of the films I was recently watching, is that the end of freedom is your liberation. Of course, the good
Right.
guys win at the end, but the controlling godlike figure was
Right.
the one who was
And
stepping
they
on
decide
that.
what kindness is, and we've already seen how well that's worked.
Yes,
We've
correct.
already seen many people be
It's like
persecuted and
this.
even imprisoned because
Yes,
somebody else decided what is good.
yes. And
That's
they say, so,
yeah.
treat others how you want to be treated. Somebody said to me that the real more influential or insightful way to think about it is treat others how they want to be treated. Let them tell you how they want to be
Yes.
treated.
That's called the
Ra-
platinum rule.
It's the platinum rule, right?
Mhm.
Versus the golden rule. That's
Right.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, queer Marxist theology, millions of dead bodies bear witness to the fact that Marxism does not work. Marxism doesn't work because it's not an economic or social theory. Marxism is a cult theology. So, acting as if it has anything to do with economics produces a devastating consequence. But this has never stopped Marxists from believing in the promises of Marxism. for these people with this whole religious idea, losing Marxism meant losing the promise of salvation.
Mhm.
And that's what happens. A lot, I call them the Munchausen mommies. They are
Mhm.
sick. They're sick in their desire to be seen as virtuous.
Mhm.
That
Yes.
they can't give that up. It doesn't
Yes.
matter. You can bring all the facts in the world, but if you bring the facts to them, they just look at you and say, "Why do you hate us? Why are you so
Yes.
hateful?" And you're
Yes.
like, I'm not hateful.
Gaslighting.
I'm trying
Yes.
to free you. I'm trying to liberate you
Yep.
from a lie,
Yep.
but that's the way that they see it, and they cannot let it go. And sadly, there are a lot of people in education, also a lot of people who work in libraries who are feeling like they are the most enlightened people. I don't think that the language that we heard in 2020, that we are the experts, was an accident. And I
No, that was not an accident at all, and I don't think I could see it in 2020 in the midst of it. It took me some time to step away from that and to understand that that was no accident.
yeah,
I drank the Kool-Aid myself for many years. I mean, I was in
right,
education, for goodness sakes, you know? So, of
right,
course, I drank the Kool-Aid. It took me a moment to kinda have an awakening, if you
right.
will.
Yeah. So now we're jumping and moving into Max Horkheimer and Herbert Marcuse. Now, with Herbert Marcuse, they call it Marx, Mao, Marcuse, are what they used to
Mhm.
carry around in the 60s. So that's the level that we're talking about. I know that in Washington, there were people who would wear skirts, and the skirts would have a picture of Mao on them, and then they'd wear T-shirts that said "Left of Mao." So,
Wow.
and when I'm saying people, the one that I specifically remember was a mayor who wore, excuse me, a shirt like that. So, in fact, by the 1960s, critical Marxists like Herbert Marcuse and Max Horkheimer were admitting that advanced capitalism delivers the good. Oh, so the short of this that I jumped to is that Marxism wasn't working because we had capitalism and middle class people were very comfortable, and especially if they've come here from another country, or
Yes.
if they migrated from, like, I'm also listening to Hillbilly Elegy right now. And so if they migrated and they were now able to live comfortable lives, well, then they became counter revolutionaries. And Marx and Horkheimer and or Marcuse and Horkheimer and other people could not accept that. So that's where we are. So by the 1960s, critical Marxists like Herbert Marcuse and Max Horkheimer were admitting that advanced capitalism delivers the good and allows workers to build a better life.
Yes.
One, to be sure, is a good life. This, they observed, robbed the working class of its revolutionary energy and potential by stabilizing the worker and his good life. In other words, the communist revolution was no longer inevitable. The worker
Right.
was no longer likely to be its vehicle, and Marxists needed new tools to push us all towards the end of history. So not only is it narcissistic, but it's also nihilistic. And
Yes.
again, go back to mental health. Our children feel hopeless, and that's intentional because these people ultimately want an end of history. So they tell our children, you will never be able to buy a house. And when our children believe that, and they don't work to, have the money to be able to buy a home, then BlackRock comes in, picks it up, and they manifest the history that they want. That's why we have to be careful about what our children are being taught,
Yes.
because while it's hard, I was looking with a friend yesterday and looking at the prices of rent. And I'm like, wow, to rent a one bedroom apartment is about equivalent to the mortgage on my 5 bedroom home.
Yes.
So that's craziness.
Yes.
Um, but it is doable. But our
Yes.
children are being taught that it's not. Our children are being taught that the only thing that's going to save them is socialism.
Yes.
So So
And
the
they'll be
worker,
happy. They'll be happy with
exactly.
it.
Yes, the worker has no longer, the worker is no longer likely to be its vehicle. The Marxists needed new tools to push us all towards the end of history. Marcuse, following the success of Mao's Chinese Revolution, suggested identity politics would be the next.
Mm-hmm.
So identity politics then, and again, it's not that I can't read, it's that there's a little screen in front of me that says I'm screen sharing, and so some of the words get cut off. But the identity politics, they literally called it the ghetto classes. And what that meant is that they went to the blacks and they went to the homosexuals and they seeded with them bitterness. They seeded with them a revolutionary energy, a communist revolutionary energy. And again, they never walked up to them and said, "Oh, we're going to teach you how to be communist." So, I mean, I guess kind of by the time the Black Panthers came along, they did actually tell them what they were going to do. But most people who follow this stuff today don't recognize it's, like I said, they don't just walk in and say, "Hey, you're going to learn Marx, you're going to study Marx, that's what you're going to do." They guise it in something else.
Yes.
So here's one. Simone de Beauvoir, Michel Foucault, and Judith Butler inherited the core concepts developed by Marcuse in the first half of the 20th century, and they applied them specifically to studying sex, gender, and sexuality. So this is where queer theory started. They all focused specifically on sex, gender, and sexuality because the regular class system wasn't going to work. We had too much of a thriving middle class.
Yes. And it continues to break down the nuclear family.
Right. And so queer,
That's a very easy way to do that. Go ahead.
I'm kind of repeating a little bit of last week, but queer
Yes.
theory ultimately is to abolish normalcy.
Yes.
When they can get rid of normalcy, which
Yes.
is cis heteronormative behaviors, when they can get rid of that, then man turns to his creative and social nature, which is intrinsically queer. So,
That and that's why one of the reasons why using the word pathology when somebody comes in with a mental health issue and you talk about a pathology behind it, using the word pathology has become extremely negative and extremely um, demoralizing and not recommended to use. And I had a problem with that because to me pathology means it's outside of the norm, it's outside the typical, it's outside of what would be a healthy reaction to something. And if we take that word pathological out of it, then anything goes. Every reaction is accepted. Every single, situation that steps outside of normalcy, no matter who it might hurt, is okay. Then everything becomes okay. And I remember making my fair video and specifically saying on there that I couldn't even use that word in class anymore without people being in an uproar because they don't want there to be a normal. They want that to be completely dismissed so that you can indulge in all of these different sort of queer theory actions, if you will.
well,
And
go ahead.
when you can't call that pathological, then it becomes something that's normalized.
Right. Yeah. And they did that on purpose. So they
Hmm.
taught our children words like, or they taught all of us, society, words like triggered. But we can't do that because it
Yes.
could trigger someone. And what we were
Yes.
doing was breaking down their resilience
Yes.
intentionally,
Yes.
intentionally to teach our people. I have seen very small kids come in and say, "I can't do that because it twiggles me." Like they can hardly
They
talk, but
can't
they can
even
say,
pronounce it yet.
yeah, exactly. And they have been taught to not be resilient. So, and that is on purpose. So in this one, this is on page 62, David Halpern writes, Queer theory needs not to be grounded in any positive truth or in any stable reality. As the word implies, queer does not name some natural kind or refer to some determinate object. It acquires its meaning from its oppositional relation to the norm.
Hmm.
So think about that.
Absolutely.
If the goal of queer theory, and we want our schools to be safe and welcoming, and again, remember those words do not mean what we think they mean, because if they did, I would be all about it.
Yes.
That's not what they mean. They mean safe and welcoming to queer ideology.
Yes.
So if they want them to be queer, then what is the point of school? What is the
Yes.
point of education if it is not to find positive truth or stable reality? Then what are we sending our kids to school for?
Mhm.
So queer theory is by definition whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. There is no particular to which it necessarily refers.
Yes.
That is why people will say things like, I'm unburdened by what has been.
Yes.
These people who say those kind of things mean it.
Yes.
They mean it.
And yes.
I'm going to skip this. It just says that trans people are sacred. And that just means that they have surpassed, apparently. Um, they've surpassed the divinity. They've surpassed what we are taught to believe God created them as. That, I think that's the most neutral way I can say that.
Sure.
Here's another one. This is from Del Palma R in 2013 in Sex Education, Sexuality, Society, and Learning. It says queer theory doesn't care about biology, science, or truth. Those things are all controlled by the normal bourgeoisie, the
Hmm.
the ruling class. This ruling class alienates people. This one kills me. Collecting this alienation as material power to impose their worldview and I don't know what it says under there on anyone.
Way of life.
Yeah,
Way
and
of
way
life.
of life. Okay, on anyone else under the guise of being normal. And the reason that this kills me is because if you look at who funds our education, going from Qatar, where it's not real great to be trans, going to the people here who fund it, going to Bill and Melinda Gates, going
Hmm.
to the Zuckerberg Chans, these are people in cis heteronormative relationships.
Yes.
So
Yes.
these are people who are forcing your children to swallow this stuff. Even locally, we don't have we don't have a governor or many representatives who are gay. You know, you're in California, I'm in Utah. We don't have that going on, but they're shoving
We,
it down our throats and telling our
yeah.
children they must accept it.
Yeah. I mean, our
Are they not the
governor,
bourgeoisie?
yes, and our governor's children continue to go to private school while the rest of the state was locked up and the schools were closed. He had his children go to, like, they go to an elite private school up in
Wow.
like Napa Valley, wine country. It's gorgeous up there.
Wow.
Rented out
They
a
had a normal
restaurant.
education.
They
Yeah.
had a normal education, rented
Yeah.
out a restaurant for a
Yes.
birthday party for
Yep.
to celebrate whatever, while everything else was
French
closed. And
laundry.
these
Yeah.
French Laundry, one of the most
Yeah.
expensive restaurants in the country.
Yeah.
And you have these people with these small shops, business owners that are crumbling and shutting their doors, and they can't afford to stay open. I mean, I could go on and on about the problems in California, but those are examples of people that the elitists and the ones telling you all of this are not the ones that are practicing it. It's the most hypocritical, sort of behavior that that you can even imagine.
Yes. So, and then the next one is, I mean, summing up the end of this chapter, queer Marxism lusts for complete control over society. All of it.
Yep.
That's why they say when I'm talking to queer children, I'm not just talking to the ones who already identify as trans or queer or gay. I'm talking to the whole classroom because we are all queer.
Yes.
Literally in a drag queen story hour, in a post I made this week about it. And I'm sorry I don't have exactly who the quote's from, but I have definitely put it online. You're welcome to look it up there. But that's the goal. The goal is to queer all of society. That's what it
Yes.
means ultimately to be a global citizen.
Yes.
Um, let me, what was that? I don't know where I am. Okay, that's chapter 4. So chapter 4, and that one took a while. So chapter 4 starts to talk about how we got this in education. It talks about, I'll just read you a little bit of it, and then I'm going to put a push in for a film that will explain to you and get you to where we'll be next week. So um, the film is called Beneath Sheep's Clothing, and
Mhm.
it's how communism has infiltrated American schools and churches.
Mhm.
And it's by my friend Julie Bailing. But to fully comprehend the queer education children receive in schools nationwide, we have to explore the Marxist takeover of our educational system. The Marxist cult has long known that education is a crucial lever for jumpstarting and maintaining communist revolutions. And that
They're
is
going after your kids. I mean, it is all at the academic level, like I said before, that's the launch pad for all of this.
yes. So Lenin created Marxist schools to teach children that the entire purpose of your lives is to build a communist society.
Mhm.
Chairman Mao Zedong of the People's Republic of China rose to power after his Great Leap Forward, which killed millions in a kind of self-made famine situation,
Mhm. Mhm.
by brainwashing the youth and using them to ignite his cultural revolution. We have so many young people who cannot wait for socialism. They also, it's it is missing in many of their books. There have been some great teachers who have tried to teach it. There are a few teachers who will wear shirts that say things like socialism sucks.
Mhm.
But when the curriculum says differently, that's very hard. When the internet says differently, that's very hard. And they do not know this. We tried in the last legislative session, several of my friends who've come here from socialist and communist countries wanted it taught. And we actually had representatives who said, now's not the time to talk about socialism. Now's not the time
Mm.
to teach our kids.
Mhm. Mm.
And
So
they're
when is the
people,
time?
right, when we have it and it's time to embrace it.
Mm.
They don't want to teach
Mm.
about the horrors of it.
Mhm.
So they knew exactly what they were doing. So Karl Marx believed that his revolutionary theory of history um, predicated the inevitable collapse of a capitalist society. So he scrambled for the first part of the 20th century. I can't see that word at all. Um, but they knew that culture played a role. So I wrote on the side social media.
Yes.
Culture plays a huge role in brainwashing our children.
Yes.
And what happens, and I think because of time, we'll have to leave it around. We'll wrap up there. I'll go and see if there's any questions or comments. But what happens in that time is that they're the teachers will say, well, we have to talk about it because they already have it from their cell phones, whether that's pornography or whether that's um, supposed systemic racism or whatever it is. They have those generative conversations because it's on their phones, again, by who? Again, by those people who are not living this for themselves. The
That's right.
hypocrisy is huge here. And so yeah, brainwashing our kids. So neo-Marxist.
Well, and
Okay.
there's a link to, the increase in social media use. There's a link to that and the increase in suicidality
Yes.
among teens and preteens, that
Yes.
the suicide rates have, you know, doubled, tripled. I'm not sure what the
Yeah,
statistic is exactly, but the connection to social media is something that's being looked at by researchers as a huge cause reason,
right.
um, at least a contributing factor as to why the suicide rates are as high as they are with our young people.
Well, it also keeps them from actually connecting, and
Yes,
connecting is what tends to give you purpose.
yes,
It's
connecting with
just,
other people. Absolutely.
but again, who created it?
Yes.
So Gramsci, all the way back in the early part of the 20th century, Gramsci introduced sex into the classroom.
Hmm.
And he did it so quickly and so fastly, and the parents lost their minds and were like, yeah, we're not doing this. And he was taken out very quickly, um, because yeah, they were just like, what are you trying to do? This is not where we culturally stand. Today, it seems that many people are not willing to stand. They're not willing to make waves that need to be made in order to protect our kids. So
People don't want to make waves because they're very worried about their reputation and being thrown out of their particular community, whatever that
yes,
community is. And
yes,
they're
it's
afraid
true.
of being alienated. And that's a huge problem because there's more people who think rationally than not, I believe, in this country. But it's the ones that are the loudest, that are barking, that are drowning out the voices of the people that are reasonable and rational. If we as reasonable and rational people would take the chance and risk when we can to, to speak out, I think you would find a bigger circle, a bigger community of people who are rejecting of these particular ideas and do not want this in the schools.
Right,
But it takes some bravery, it takes some courage, and it takes being able to be in a position where you can potentially pull your kid from a school and homeschool, or come up with a pod of other parents and homeschool together. So I mean, it's very hard for people to stand up. I spoke out because it's just me and my husband. I don't have kids. You know, we have, my son has a daughter. My husband has a daughter who's in college. We don't have kids together. So for me, the implications of what would happen to my career, um, were not going to be as devastating on our family.
right.
But that's not the case with most of the people that I know who haven't said anything.
It's
And
true.
that's tough.
It is. And unfortunately, I think that it's very, very hard to judge the people who turned their heads in the past, in history, the
Yes.
people that we've learned to judge because,
Yes.
their neighbors got taken away and maybe put on trains.
Yes.
Um, we now know how they got there.
Yes.
And so while it is extremely hard, and it is hard to be hated by people.
Yes.
It's still necessary because
It's necessary.
yeah. So
That's right.
so neo-Marxists created critical theory to first weaken. Remember, we're telling our children that they are should be easily triggered. We're telling them that they're fragile. So the first thing that they did was they weakened our children, and then they radically transformed them.
Hmm.
You have to have people so broken that they are looking for someone to help them. They are looking for someone to absolve
Save
them.
them.
They are looking for someone to heal them. And that is what this whole mess is about, is breaking them intentionally
Yes.
so that somebody else can come along and say, but we know the true path. And if
Yes.
that's not a cult, I don't know what is.
Yes.
So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there's any comments in our area over here. We have, where's notes? I don't know. Chat, let's see. We have nothing in our chat. Does anyone have anything that they want to say? Is it just us now? It could just be us. Nope, there's 5.
Yeah. There are a few.
So awesome. Um, yeah. So next time we'll talk about Paulo Friere. Um,
Yes.
and we might go through. I highly recommend the easiest way that I do it, because it's an extremely heavy book. It's extremely hard to know that there are people who intentionally target our children. But I highly recommend getting the audiobook. And then what I do is I really only pay attention to it the day that I'm doing. So I do it twice. I do a live I do a live at the park book club, and then I do the Saturday morning one. And my hope is that, well, that it'll reach more people because
Yes.
they need to know what's going on. But it's also heavy. So listening to it one day and then trying to fill your head with some other stuff another day is probably a good thing to do.
Yes.
So I don't see any comments. Do you have any last minute thoughts?
Um, yeah, no, I think we've covered quite a bit today, at least from starting chapter 4 and going through chapter 3. I I suppose what I want to say is I just, I wish more people would just speak up. There's so many people who feel this way and who are afraid, or they, my husband's friend, his child has decided that, she's now non-binary, and he doesn't know what to do other than support the child and call her by her new name, refer to her as non-binary. And I understand that parents just want to do what they think is right and what they want to do to help their kids. And I think I'm going to generally make that statement because I do believe that generally that's true. But when the school tells you and the therapist tells you that if you don't affirm this, your child may kill themselves or attempt suicide, that's a fallacy. It's not true. It's not backed by any statistical, research or findings. What is backed by statistical findings is that when you have an open dialogue with your child, you tell them you don't agree, this is not how the world works, that you have an open dialogue and communicate. They may not immediately after the first conversation reverse their paths, but over time, that starts to stick. And over time, as a parent, you can support your child in, you know, them wanting to succeed. You'll always love them. And this is not true. These things are not true. You were born with genitalia that is female or male or whatever the case may be. And let's talk about why that's so difficult for you? What is it about that that makes you want to be in a different body? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that help lead change versus blind affirmation.
Yeah, and I also feel so we don't have that kind of issue, and I'm grateful for that, knock on
Sure.
wood. But I also feel that doing what you can to connect with your child and to get them away from technology as much as possible will also help.
Take them out, take them to the park, take them to an amusement park, get out and do something physical and active. That'll help a lot. And
Yeah,
you can have the most profound conversations that way too. They don't necessarily happen at home around the kitchen table. They may be while you're out and about having a great time and this conversation just happens to come up or
yeah,
something is said. Those are precious moments.
yeah.
But if the kid's in front of the phone like this and the screen all day, then those opportunities are not going to present themselves as much.
Same thing with the earbuds.
Yes.
If they're checked out, they're in their heads, they're thinking about other things. Also
Yes.
give them something to do. Like
Yes.
I was watching Twister last night for
Oh yeah.
the original one, and I'm watching these people who get out and smile as everything around them is torn to rubble. But that's resilience. Resilience is
Yes.
going, and tomorrow we'll build back, right?
Yes.
That is not what our kids are being taught. They are being taught to catastrophize everything.
Yes.
This huge, over the top problem that can't possibly be solved, and the best way out is literally out.
Yes.
And that's intentional. That's
Yes.
intentional. There's multiple ways that they can control through queer theory. You can have less children.
Yes.
The goal is to make these little kids not want to be mommies and daddies. That's
Yes.
literally what Drag Queen Story Hour is about.
Yes.
So you can do that. You can tell children through groups like Tumblr,
Yes.
if your parents don't affirm you, you should just threaten these things and maybe even do them.
Yes.
So there's lots of ways that our children are intentionally being taught that they can't handle the world.
Yes.
And so go out and give them a purpose. Go out and volunteer. Go do a food bank. Go sing in a
Yes.
home. Do whatever you can to make sure that your child is rooted in goodness.
Yes.
I think that that would greatly help. Well, Christine, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank
I
you.
to stop recording
All right.
and